Devery Jacobs plays Elora in Reservation Dogs. I'm at Noble Gold Derby, and I wanted to start off by asking you, Devery, what is the most important thing to get right from your perspective in this show?
I would say the most important thing to get right in Reservation Dogs is for us to be able to check in with ourselves and make sure that we're coming from a truthful place, because this is the first show of its kind with all indigenous writers, directors, actors, producers, and creatives nearly in every department who have indigenous people involved. So I think the one thing for us to make sure we get right is that we're not just doing it for the sake of representation, is that we're actually creating it because we're telling a human story, and we're creating it for ourselves and for our communities.
With that it's historic in that sense. From your perspective as an artist, as a creator, is it freeing to be in that environment, or do you feel like the weight of responsibility?
I think a bit of both. At the end of the day, I just have to remind myself and kind of operate with blinders on that, like, our responsibility is to these characters and to this story first and foremost. And if we get distracted or overwhelmed with the amount of responsibility that it is, because it's a lot of pressure. It's I think for many projects, when they're marking the first of, it ends up becoming like a double-edged sword, where then everybody wants you to be representative of each of their experiences, and we just can't be everything to everyone. And so the best that we can do is just like focus on our jobs and make sure that we're telling the best story that we can in the most truthful and authentic way.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because like every single person is unique and has a completely unique experience to them, so it's hard to reflect everyone. Right? What's a truth or something from your own experience that you've brought into this character and this show?
What is a truthful component of my own life?
Yeah. What's something that's true to you that you've brought in?
I would say something that's true to me would be that I'm an older sibling, and I very much feel that in Elora Danon's energy with the fellow Res Dogs and her kind of like wrangling everybody together. I definitely did that in my upbringing, and was something that I like shifted into this series for sure.
And what do you think Elora's truth is? What if you had to sort of define that and speak to her truth?
I mean, there's so many things that I could get into, but if I were to boil it down, I think Elora's truth is that she's somebody who needs healing, whether it's self-healing or community healing or all of the above. Like, she's somebody who's undergone serious things, despite the show being a comedy. Like, one of the elements of indigenous comedy that I love so much is that our humor has a little bit of bite to it. It has a little bit of grit, because we've used humor as a coping mechanism for the past 500 plus years of colonization. And so for Elora's standpoint, I think that healing is really the thing that she needs moving forward.
What was the biggest sort of stretch for you in playing this character?
Well, I'm not from Oklahoma. I don't have a Southern accent. But also, I think I would say that in terms of personality, me and Elora like really differ. She's way more badass than I ever could be. And she's way more direct and to the point, whereas like I'm somebody who, I don't know, walks a little lighter in my loafers.
And you're talking about the comedy. What is there a particular moment or scene that you found particularly funny from season one?
From season one, there's so many moments that are hilarious to me. And I find every time I either reread the scripts or watch the season, I get something a little bit different out of every time. I think something that's particularly funny to me is just like, oh God, how much time do we have? I would say the funniest thing for me personally would probably be Uncle Brownie, just because it's like everywhere you go, everybody has an Uncle Brownie, and like all of his shenanigans, and like the episode where we're just like tracking down the weed for him, and I don't know, it changes depending per day, but today that's my favorite comedic moment in all of it.
Yeah. You were saying indigenous Americans have been using comedy as a coping mechanism for 500 years. What do you think? What are things that you find particularly funny? And like maybe how do you maybe use comedy as a coping mechanism in your life?
I would say like the first thing that comes to mind are funerals on my res. Obviously, it depends on the circumstance. If somebody passes away young, that's one thing. But like when somebody's lived a good full life, they're some of the best parties on the res. And you like will show up and people will be there all hours of the night, like feasting, like at the wake, having the best time and just telling all the stories of the stupid stuff that person did growing up. I would say that's definitely a way that we use comedy to be able to swallow the hard stuff too.
Now, Elora is one of sort of 4 of the Res Dogs, the gang in the series. You got Bear, Cheese, and Willie Jane as well. What, like, in terms of like collaboratively as sort of a foursome on the show, how do you serve each other and get that dynamic right?
I think it took all of 20 minutes in preparation, mostly when we met each other during the chemistry read when we were in LA. And it was the first time that most of us had met each other, but DeFaro and Paulina had already played brother and sister on a project before, so they were already tight. And then Lane was just such a chatterbox and was talking about like his obsession with Godzilla and just seeing it in the movie theater. So like we became fast friends in the chemistry test office, and this was pre-pandemic. But then while we were shooting the pilot back in August of 2020, I think we went from being fast friends to like being fast family, because we all just connected so much. And they're my siblings now. Like they are, like I have brothers that I never had growing up. And so that's where I'd say that like our dynamics as characters will oftentimes play out in real life, and we all kind of look out for and take care of each other.
In that sort of, in those scenes when you've got all 4 of you together, how do you sort of work to make them look good and serve them in the broader scene of the show?
Even though I'm a young actor, I think I've had a bit more experience than some of my other castmates. And so in that, just seeing Lane's growth from the time that he stepped in front of the camera during the pilot until now, where we're currently shooting season 2, is wild. And I would like to think that like I've begun helping him in terms of just like explaining how things work on set, where it's like, okay, we're getting the wide first and then we're going to go in for coverage, and that's what this means. It's like learning a whole other language. And then it didn't take very long at all for me to kind of like help, and along with Sterlin and everybody else involved in the show, helping set him up for success to be able to get really good at it. And he's like gone above and beyond. I mean, like the kid just worked with Steven Spielberg on his latest movie. Like he's gone places. He's not going places. He's already gone there.
Well, what's something that you've learned from your experience on this show and that you've grown in?
Oh my gosh. I think that the biggest thing that I've really taken away, which I didn't know could be possible before, was that I didn't realize that community and industry could coexist together. And it was really working with Sterlin and seeing how he really changed the hierarchy of traditional film, and brought community members in. And for me, I learned that those things can coexist harmoniously, and I'd never seen it done before, and I didn't know if it was even possible. And so that's been my biggest takeaway, and it's my hope that that's the first of many projects to be able to do that.
Do you think you've gotten better as an artist and actress through playing Elora?
Oh my gosh, like playing Elora Danon has been like, I know a lot of actors say like, oh my God, like this has been such an incredible process and all that. But I mean it when I say it in the sense that there have been so many moments in my career when when I've worked with non-Indigenous folks and creatives, and when I've been placed in roles that were meant for diversity hires to center the white or not Indigenous lead character. And so to play a role like Elora Danon and to be given so much to chew on and to be trusted so much in developing the character and really bringing her to screen has been one of the greatest undertakings and challenges and rewarding experiences I've ever had as an artist before. And I've been fortunate enough, we're in season 2, Sterlin's actually welcomed me into the writer's room, and I've co-written an episode with him that'll be coming out in season 2. And yeah, it's just, I've been given so much, to work with in this show. And I also really appreciate how Sterlin's just been cultivating new directors. Like last season we had, I think it was 2 new directors, and the same thing for of television, and same thing for this season, because we've all been on the ground. We've all been doing indie films forever and just waiting for opportunities to come along. And so yeah, I would say that playing Elora Danon's been one of like the biggest defining moments of my career.
Yeah, and like I guess as you were saying before with Community and that whole idea where you want in the communities are often best when you've got people who are experienced and people who are fresh and trying things for the new time, and you learn different things from both groups of people. I was going to talk to you about being in the writer's room and getting to be on that side of the table. So you've let us in well there, Devery. What has that dynamic been like? How has that experience been joining this room for a show you do know well because you were one of the main actresses in it for the first time?
Totally. Yeah. I think I was fortunate in the sense that Sterlin had known of my work as a filmmaker before this whole process, through the indie film circuit, and he's also been a champion of upcoming Indigenous artists for a long time. And so when season 2 came along, I knew I really wanted to be a part of the room, and so I was like getting all of my materials together and getting ready for a battle to try and convince him, and then he ended up offering it to me. And I was like, wait, I don't have to battle for this. I don't have to fight for it. And so he welcomed me into the room with open arms, and it was only supposed to be for a few weeks at first, but then they extended my contract for a longer time. And then I was in it for the whole time. And then next thing I knew, he was inviting me to co-write an episode that was really meaningful to me personally, but also as the character. And so that whole process, while normally I would likely be really intimidated by all of it, I looked around and it was full of peers who I've come up with in the indie native film scene. And there were writers of all degrees of experience levels. And it was an environment that was incredibly supportive and really safe. Like we got to pitch the most weird stuff that and some of them made it into the show, surprisingly. And that I'll definitely give credit to FX for just kind of giving us free rein to do whatever we want to do. And so that whole process has been like such a learning experience, but has also been so rewarding on what, like Sterlin modeling what it can look like when you're also cultivating community with you as you go.
Yeah, well, it worked out very well for you, though. It's a shame that you spent all that time on that presentation or whatever to convince him that he was already going to ask.
He's ready to pitch.
Yeah, it's like, oh no, I just was up all night on a PowerPoint for this, and now I've got it already. Okay, let's go back to season 1. An episode that I think for you was particularly pertinent was the California Dreaming episode. It is particularly, well, there's you get your driver's license. Congratulations to Elora for that. But obviously,
fun fact.
Yes.
I actually got my full license only after that episode by a couple of months.
There you go. How was the test when you went for the full license in real life?
I felt like I had a whole lot of experience. I spent like many days just driving Bill Burr around. And this wasn't like, there was a couple of shots where they had us on the rig, but other times like I was actually driving. I was actually driving that giant chip truck. And so I feel like I got like a lot of hours under my belt, and I was old hat at it by the time I did my real driver's test.
Yeah, I hope it was less eventful than the one that
I would
Elora
say
went
it's
on.
a little bit less eventful.
Yeah.
One would hope.
Was it weird going for a driver's test and sort of going, oh, I don't have to be acting now. I don't have to be in character. I can just focus on the driving.
I was just really worried because there was one part in the scene where I'm supposed to parallel park and I'm supposed to hit the other car.
Yeah.
And then at first, Tasba, the episode's writer director, she came up to me and she was like, "You're parallel parking too well. Like you need to mess it up a little bit." And then I started getting really good at messing it up, and I started getting really good at bumping the car behind me. I think there was one take I didn't even mean to, and I did it anyway. And I was like, this is not a good look. This won't set me up for my real test.
Go to the real test. Can you parallel park? And you're like, well, I'm really good at hitting the other car. You want me to hit the other car? I've practiced hitting the cars on my parallel park.
Times.
Yeah. First person ever who's a few weeks before the driver test has been trying to hit cars in their practicing. Okay. So there's also some fun moments like hitting the car in that episode. There's also some pretty serious moments, and particularly the scene where Bill is talking to you, or the coach is talking to you about your mom, and that's a really powerful scene for you. But he does most of the talking, so it's largely you reacting and you processing the sort of recount you're hearing. How do you approach that as an actress, and what's sort of going on in your head as that sort of, as you're having to think about how you respond without speaking?
I mean, I think it's, for me as an actor in my process, I really try to approach it by my reactions and everything depending on what the other person is giving me. And so it takes like an incredible amount of focus and making sure that I'm really with and feeling the other person. And that was the true guiding force. Bill did such an incredible job on that episode, and he didn't make it difficult to react to everything that he was saying.
Yeah. And then there's also a scene where you find Daniel, that it's a much shorter scene, but just as powerful. What about approaching that one?
That scene was very specific in the way that it approached the way it was filmed, the subject matter, how we're reacting. And I have spoken before how the story of Daniel isn't merely a storyline. It isn't just a plot point for us to get through. It's and something to drive the story. It's something that actually affects each of our communities and is real for each of us. And in order to make sure that we were telling that story in a good way, we wanted to make sure that we had Woodco, who is a Muskogee elder, come onto set, and he had an opening ceremony for us, and had smudge readily available. And he essentially guided us through that, saying that any energy that we unleash or bring up during that day and during that filming would be left there once we were finished. And also another component is we didn't want anything to be graphic visually. We paid homage to Taika Waititi's film Jojo Rabbit, in how Jojo discovers his mother, who unfortunately was killed, and we only see her feet, and we're able to recognize her through that way. So we paid homage to Daniel and to Jojo Rabbit and Taika's work through that. But also, like, I made sure not to look at Dalton Kramer, who's an incredible first-time actor who plays Daniel. He was such an awesome scene partner, and I made sure not to look at him before, and the reaction that we saw on screen was my genuine reaction that happened on that take. And it took a while for my body to understand and realize that it wasn't real. And I was really glad for the crew for them letting him down from the rig between each take, and he would come over and we would hold each other, and I would like get my nervous system to calm down and realize that it was like, okay, he's here. But it's such a tough subject, and it affects nearly every Native family and community. And so for us to not talk about it or to shy away from that subject just didn't make sense, but it was making sure that it was in a way that helped honor that story and promote healing, as opposed to being trauma porn or something like that.
Yeah. And you mentioned Taika, who wrote the pilot episode with Sterlin as well. So there's a nice Taika, that's a nice sort of connection that you guys made there. Finally, Devery, if you were to use one word to describe Reservation Dogs, what word would you use?
One word to describe Reservation Dogs, yeah. I would say Resi.
Resi, I love it. Well, Devery, all the best of luck for the Emmy Awards this year for Reservation Dogs, for yourself and everyone else on the show. People watching this interview can go to goldderby.com, where they can make their own awards predictions, watch other interviews with award contenders, and join the discussion in our forums. And Devery, just thank you so much for spending time talking with us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, of course. Thank you so much for having me.